All right. Let's see if I'm around, if I'm visible, if I'm audible. But I'm not audible. I don't work for Jeff Bezos. But, the stream is at least there. Yes, I am at least audible. Also shows me how incredibly loud my keyboard is. Maybe I should do something about that at some point. Because holy shit. Well, I wonder if that is because the keyboard is on the desk where the microphone stands. Maybe it changes if I take the keyboard off. Who knows? Certainly something I'll figure out. Oh, gods. Oh, so good morning, first of all. I mean, good evening for you, but I'm not sure if that's a good sign. Understanding Hegel is quite the achievement, although I'm not sure if it's a good one. Hooray! Hello, Ori. How you doing? So yeah, because I just mentioned the whole thing on Discord, right? So the thing is, that collection of essays by Italo Calvino, it's just him talking about a bunch of books he likes, which are maybe part of what you might call classics, but partly not. I mean, he just picks books that he's interested in. And the first essay is called Why Read the Classics, where he talks about classics and why everyone has to pick the ones that are classics for themselves, for one person, because, not all of those will speak to you, but there are books that, he calls classics, which are, books that have like a very specific sort of like bring things with them that make rereading them again and again and so forth important. It opens that term classic open. It opens it up to like basically every kind of book that has been around for a while. Like the first part is really funny though, because he starts like classics are books that people don't read, that people reread, even though they just put the re in there because they don't want to admit to never having read them before. And I'm like, yeah, that's an interesting definition of classics. I'm fine with that, but it's like the back cover goes like, well, this book is even more important nowadays, where people from use the word multicultural. I don't think it uses cultural Marxism. Like, want to attack the Western canon, and it's like that's not what he's doing. He's talking about books like about Persian literature in there, and I think it's not the Western canon that he's defending. He's talking. It's just a collection of like essays on different books he's interested in. It's like, I don't know, can it? But I guess we can't live with that because we have to do the culture war, and we even had to do it back in like 1991 or whenever that was published. Hey, Britain. Yeah, I can feel the idea of like getting distracted. Certainly, there's enough stuff out there happening that can distract us all. How far along are you with Yiddish Policemen's Union now? Also, there is uh, some funny sort of like synchronicity things happening right now. So, in one of those Italo Calvino books, essays, he talks about I think it's Balzac. Yeah, I don't know, Stendhal, and about Roland Barthes writing an essay on. Or a lecture on Stendhal that he was supposed to deliver in 1981, I think, or 1980. But he obviously died in a famous car accident, which is really funny because yesterday I finally, what with me having access to American books now, I found the fact I'm very happy that. The Seventh Function of Language is now available to me, which is a book. I've said it's probably the most snobbist piece of postmodern literature out there, because it's a novel about the death of Roland Barthes, which may be a murder. And it's the investigation, and it features all those French postmodernists and structuralists, post-structuralists. It features, Michel Foucault. It even features Umberto Eco as a character, and it's all those different French intellectuals of the 1970s and 80s who are all sort of like in like a secret society, and yeah, it as I said, it's probably the most obnoxiously snobist, elitist kind of book ever. And I was super happy that I finally found it, because I wanted to read it for a long time, because it makes fun of all those French people in a lot of ways. Um, and I was super happy that I found it yesterday, because I remembered that I wanted to read it. I mean, I've wanted to read it for a long time now, but I remembered to look yesterday that now I can get it. And then in the next thing that I read, Italo Calvino talks exactly about the death of Roland Barthes. I'm like, oh, I guess I should take this as a sign to maybe actually get to this. Even more funny, because yesterday I did read read the mythologies essay collection by Roland Barthes, which, yeah, I'm taking the distancing myself from Redwall thing very seriously, as you can tell. Yeah, yeah, there is certainly there's a comedy in Yiddish Policeman's Union there, and like especially like the Landsman Perko sort of like partnership. I think works really well for like some really cool sort of like buddy cop almost comedy between the two. Actually, Death of the Author is not part of the mythologies. It's a different in a different essay collection. I mean, it was published in, oh god, what's it called, modern literature, one of those journals at the time. So it was not part of mythologies. Mythologies though does have like the first essay in mythologies is on wrestling, and Baudelaire. I think Baudelaire or Flaubert. I confuse those two all the time. Anyway, it's mostly about wrestling, and it reads like the script for like a bread tube kind of video essay on theatrics, on the theatrics of wrestling, comparing it to Greek tragedy and so forth. It's just really interesting. Obviously, not all of those essays in mythologies have aged super well. In that they are obviously stuff that he wrote for different newspapers and magazines in the 1950s in France. So a lot of it is very much specific to French society events and stuff that have obviously. You sometimes miss the context when he's writing about some romance of Marlon Brando's with a French girl or whatever, and I'm like, I don't know nothing about that. But there's some good stuff in there. Obviously, there's the one on, I think the famous ones are the one on wrestling, which obviously still works because wrestling hasn't exactly changed. I mean, he's talking about French wrestling, but it's not that different from American wrestling, and he does compare it to like American wrestling. We're talking wrestling, not like Olympic wrestling, the sport, but more like the theatrical wrestling in that regard. And there's one on the Tour de France as a classic epic, and that one is, I think, is one that has stuck around. There's some other ones that are really interesting on like uh, so sort of like court proceedings and like a murder case where he talks about language obviously a lot. I mean, it's all about so some of them have a lot to say still, and some of them are haven't are very context sensitive, as a computer scientist would say. But certainly interesting stuff to read. There was one that I found really fascinating. It's just a super short one. I don't know, it's like 2 pages or so, on authors on holiday, which is really interesting because he's referring to, like, I think, to another French newspaper publishing sort of like an article series or whatever on famous authors and what they're doing in their holidays. And his point is that while holidays, going to the beach and seaside and so forth, are sort of like a space apart for the average working person, even like the super rich or whatever, where you go to the beach side, to the seaside or whatever, do a holiday thing, and you are, away from the working life and so forth, and then you go back to your other life. That is not possible for authors, because even though they may be at the beach, they are certainly already planning the next novel. They are maybe looking at proofs and so forth. And I like the idea, so the idea that he's sort of touching upon is that being an author is means being apart or set apart from and mythologized, obviously, apart from the rest of society. Because what makes you an author is not actually that you are writing books for a living, but it's sort of something different, and that both authors and especially the non-author part of society sort of need that thing to be need authors to be different, and how that obviously opens you up for exploitation, which is something we recently talked about, how being an author is still very much seen as being different from the it's not seen as having the job of writing words, but it's something different, which is what you see in the sort of like the relation between publishers and books and authors in a lot of ways. So I found that interesting because it's from 1950 something, and the way he looks at it from that newspaper series on famous authors in yeah. So certainly interesting, and the fact that it is free on Audible. I think it's free on Audible for people who are in the US. It's not available in Europe for whatever reason. Although Britain, I think, isn't it like that? Everyone is always saying these strange times to be a Jew, and then it goes like, well, it's always strange times. They are always strange times to be a Jew. So I think there's something deeper in there. Hey, Demi Drake, how you doing? The Northwater. Yeah, I haven't. No. So I'm finishing up that essay collection by Tele Calvinos, and then I will read The Great Transformation by Karl Polanyi, which is something I've wanted to read for a long time, and it finally got an audiobook. And that one is not just like the issue of the region lock thing. It's just that there is a new sort of audiobook publisher company somewhere in Canada that has been going hard at producing a lot of weird. It's a weird mix of. It's usually just like nonfiction books. They've published a lot of in the last half year or so. A lot of Michel Foucault's writing, Discipline and Punish, and History of Sexuality, and a lot of that stuff. And they have also published, as I said, this one, The Great Transformation by Karl Polanyi, which I think is one of those key texts that I feel like if you're interested in sort of like economic history, The Great Transformation is a key one. Like people like Nancy Fraser and David Harvey very much refer to it from time to time, and I prefer to read those original texts and not just what contemporary people say about them. So getting that one makes me very happy. They also like that publisher also has like a lot of weird sort of like further to the self-help whatever side of things, which kind of makes sense because they also publish a lot of like Jung's Red Notebook and stuff like that. So a lot of like Jung text as well, and some Freud text. And from there, it's always just like one small step into the self-healing community. When that stuff I don't trust, but as long as they deliver, as long as they deliver the weird French philosophers and the old school Marxists and neo-Marxists, to me, I'm fine with that. And tomorrow, The Power Broker will come out, so I can read The Power Broker. And once I'm done with The Power Broker, it should be Tuesday, and then I can talk about Death of the Author some more. Then I can read Death of the Author, which I'm excited about. The other Death of the Author. Hey, Apollo, how you doing? I don't know which names you mean, so I wouldn't be able to tell. I still appreciate the fact that Landsmann's hotel in Yiddish Policemen's Union is on Max Nordau Street, because Max Nordau is one of those Zionist authors that kind of often gets sort of not ignored, but also it has a very complicated heritage in a lot of ways, but obviously is important in his own way. So yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, reading. I'm taking that break from Redwall very seriously. just to read like some nonfiction stuff that I've sometimes wanted to read for a long time, sometimes just like accidentally stumbled upon and figured out I'll do that to sort of clear my mind before I can dive into fiction again. We have Death of the Author next week, and by then hopefully I'll have like a list of 2025 books that are coming out that I want to read. Something that like kind of shocked me, but I wasn't brave enough to click upon is like I saw the video title for like Patrick Leo's newest SFF Spotlight, and it says New Black Company and Hyperion, or New Black Company, comma Hyperion. I'm like, is Dan Simmons writing another Hyperion book? Because that would be really, really, really bad, but also show how fucking desperate the man is at this point. So I haven't figured that one out yet. Aren't we all this morning? I mean, tired. Yes, it's the one by Robert A. Caro. I am okay, I guess. I'm slowly getting back into the idea of a new year, which is why I started doing the streams again in the mornings, like going back to the gym, doing these kind of things, getting stuff done after the whole like Redwall thing. There's like one final Redwall video to come out later today, the Lord Brocktree one. Then I'm going to take a break from Redwall for until whatever time. I might still read the rest of the books and do videos about them because most of them are free on Audible, so I don't have to pay for any of them. And I'm like, hey, maybe I'll just check some of them out again. But I feel I need a break because otherwise it gets easy to fall into this rut and go like, well, just another Redwall book does the same thing as every other book, which is, the children's books. They came out like every 2 years, and it's totally fine to tell the same story every 2 years or read the same story every 2 years. I'm fine with that, but like reading them all in like one go can lead to some exhaustion, I think. The Power Broker, in a lot of ways, it's a book that that a lot of people that I appreciate, like a lot of whose content I enjoy, right? Whether that's authors writing books, whether that's some tabletop RPG designers, whether it's podcasts. A lot of people have always spoken about the Power Broker, and I've obviously, so I'm aware of the major points of Robert Moses's sort of like tenure in the U.S. and all of that, in his impact on New York and city planning and building in general. So I've been aware of Robert Moses for a long time and of that book. So I've wanted to read it for a long time, but it wasn't available in audio until now, for its 50th anniversary. So it's once again sort of like catching up on a text that a lot of people have read and that has clearly had an impact on fantasy writers, on science fiction writers. I think it also mentioned it that Max Gladstone, writer of the Craft series, and obviously one half of the writer team that wrote This Is How You Lose the Time War, has mentioned it before as as sort of like an influence. And I know Robin D. Laws and Ken Hite, the like Gumshoe system designers from what's it called, Pelgrane Press, they talked about the book before, and the guys who do the Well, There's Your Problem podcast, they have talked about it before, because obviously, I mean, they talk about like city planning and engineering disasters, so you have to talk about Robert Moses a lot. So it's just like one of those key texts that comes up again and again and again as highly influential. I mean, it won a Pulitzer back in like in 1974 or 75 when it came out, and it's one of those things, one of those books that has sort of like impacted both, I guess, the genre of the political biography in a way, but also the way that people look at city planning, the way that people use cities or think about cities in whatever they do. So I think it's just like good to have read that kind of book. It might even be a classic, so to speak. And so I think that's kind of why I want to read it. It's a massive book though. Like the audiobook is like 66 hours. That's longer than like a Sanderson novel. Isn't like Omega Canyon the thing that it should have been out like 2 or 3 years ago? Because I think I've seen the title before, and yeah. Yes, so that's the thing. Is like the Christmas thing got like more frustrating last year. But reading like all those Salvatore novels was way more painful than this one, right? Mouse is was fun, but it's still like if I were smarter, right, which I'm not, I would have started earlier and pre-recorded these videos. You know, took more time reading a Breadwell book, recording the video, reading another book, something else, and reading and so forth. Like, I mean, the books are short enough for me to go through one per day, especially if I don't do anything else, like I did during the holidays, right? But it becomes sort of like a very sort of like high pressure kind of thing. It's like you wake up, you read the book, you record the video, you go to bed, you wake up, you read the book, the thing. So it can become pretty stressful. And I think like taking this break now and maybe doing the remaining, there's nine books remaining, maybe doing the remaining nine, like one per month or something, just like whenever I feel like a quick thing, uh, then that would be, I guess an idea that allows me to sort of like appreciate them more, like savor them more, you know, not get frustrated. And yes, Audible is weird when it comes to its weird plus catalog. What is free, when and where? It's super weird. Oh yeah, so it is that Omega Canyon thing that was supposed to be out because I saw it like as an Audible pre-order like 2 years ago when I was doing the whole like Dan Simmons thing. That's when I saw Omega Canyon, and I always wanted to say Omega Massif, which is like a sludge stoner doom band, and I always confuse the two in my mind, which is okay because I'm not a big fan of Omega Massif either, so it works out. I haven't read Gideon the Ninth yet, so I can't say anything on the comparison. But I did very much enjoy the Stars Are Legion. It's really cool. It also has like the things that Cameron Hurley is best at, having like an incredibly angry um, uh, woman as main character who is so, way too much focused on herself to take care of anyone around her, which leads to a lot of people around her suffering because she's on like a revenge trip somewhere in one way or another. Is I think the strength of Cameron Hurley's writing in a lot of ways. She kind of breaks that up with the Light Brigade, but until then, yeah, angry woman destroying the universe is Cameron Hurley's best thing. And Cameron Hurley has handed in a new manuscript, so I'm very much excited to find out what that will be about because I've come to trust her at least to some to entertain me very much. So that's nice. But yeah, I like the next big thing that I'm going to read is Death of the Author. Like the next fiction that I'm excited for is Death of the Author, and then we'll see where I go from there. As I said, I have to sort of like comb through like the list of stuff that's coming out in 2025, see which ones I'm definitely going to read whenever they come out, and which ones not. And Chuck Tingle's certainly on there, and Sergio Moreno Garcia is on there, but there might be others that I've overlooked so far. And there's still a chance that Marlon James will actually get out the final Darkstar book, and that would be like an immediate thing. See, the thing with Gideon is that someone else whose opinions I also trust said that people who enjoy Gene Wolfe's writing should read Gideon the Ninth. And since I certainly very much enjoy all of the Gene Wolfe that I've read so far, which is Book of the New Sun and The Wizard and Knight and some others like what's it called, The Land Across and A Borrowed Man is the other one, and so forth. I figured why not? Um, Murderbot, I don't know because everyone loves Murderbot, which I understand. Not everyone, but a lot of people love Murderbot, and I think it speaks to something in a lot of people's sort of like life experience, which I get. But the whole thing about the TV shows, I just don't. I don't know if that speaks to me because I am not exactly a TV watcher, so I don't know if I get that certain aspect about it, right? Know what I mean? But I'm certainly willing to try both and see what I enjoy about both. After all, I mean, Motorbot is super short. I mean, at least the first one, and I can still go and do whatever I want with them. What does Jason hate? Although, if Jason hates something, there's a good chance I'll enjoy it because I think Jason and I have very different attitudes about a lot of things, including books. So, and I'm not even talking about his Malazan video, which is probably one of the most ignorant things I've ever watched on YouTube. But yeah, Martha Wells is also publishing the second book, the follow up to Witch King, which came out last year, I think. And the next one is called Demon Queen. I think it's coming out in autumn. I've seen that, but I haven't read Witch King either. So I don't know if it was any good. Like, I was hoping it would be something sort of like taking something from like the Tolkien kind of Witch King thing, because maybe that's just me being, a fan of of Nazgul. I don't know. Well, Murderbot. I mean, I've seen some people. I feel like Murderbot is one of those things that people either love because it speaks to them, or people hate it and because they think it's incredibly boring and doesn't go anywhere. Which, fair. I'm fine with controversial books that don't leave you indifferent. I think it's much better to have a book that people either love or hate, but can't stay indifferent about, than having a book that everyone goes like, "Well, that was nice." But yeah, that's because I'm an angry person. I love angry books. And no, don't feel bad about spamming. You're not exactly spamming either, anyway. So don't feel bad about that, Apollo. But good point, because I just finished my first part of PT. So what we'll do is do the first sprint where I go through comments and all of that stuff and do some administration shit, and then and also make more tea, and then we'll be back in 45 minutes. So about a 9:15 for me, which may be somewhere very late for for some of you like Britain, and 10:15 for Ori, I assume. Okay, not Tolkien-esque. Good to know. Well, I agree with AP on that one. But this is not me. This is not my monthly live stream where I'm totally fine with trashing booktubers and so forth. So I'm not going to go into that today. That's I don't think that will be worth it. All right, see you in 45. And I'm back slightly later than I thought, but I was stuck in like one email that I had to read, and yeah, took longer than I thought. Sorry about that. Hey Chantal, good morning. Prisoner of Azkaban, that's the third one, right? And yeah, look, I'm not going there. I think there is a fundamental misunderstanding, or like a fundamental difference in general worldview, attitude, and so forth between Jason and me. And I don't necessarily need to start more fights on the internet. So let's leave that unless I have to, get into a discussion with Jason for something else. But I feel like the main. So let's put it this way. I also disagree with Matt's Conan review, and I've said so on his server, and I've talked with him about it. I think that the fundamental difference is that Jason uses his Conan credentials as a writer, because I think he's self-published 2 novels or something like that. Anyway, uses those to judge the writing quality of Steven Erikson, while at the same time making very obvious mistakes that anyone knowing like having ever read like one Wikipedia article on literary criticism would not make. And that sort of like overconfidence is something that annoys me a lot about a lot of booktube content in general. It's partly why I read 25 or 26 books before I make a video on fucking Mormonism, because I try not to be overconfident. I try to back up my reasons for liking or disliking stuff with arguments, and I usually try to also back them up with sources and so forth. And yeah, when I can see the mistakes in an argument, and people still claim that they know better because they've written a book, I'm like, no, that's not how that works. Writing a book does not qualify you to judge literature. That's not how that works. Goblet of Fire is the one with the where they have the wizard tournament kind of thing, right? I remember that from conversations with my sister. I don't know much about it beyond that, except for the fact that some character dies and everyone was upset at the time because it was like the first time that like a kid died, or the first time a semi-important character died, something like that. It's been ages. Since then, I have avoided Harry Potter. Because why would I read Harry Potter? It just doesn't make any sense for me. But yeah. So I did. No, I did do some work. I did reply to YouTube comments and all of that showed up since yesterday, and I did read newsletters and emails that arrived since yesterday. Everyone being, mad at Matt Zuckerberg, Mark Zuckerberg, which I get it. Fuck that guy. I did read the very interesting Onion headline about Mark Zuckerberg, first recipient of a rat penis transplant. I did personally find that somewhat funny. Although Jeff Vandermeer retweeted, re-skeeting it on Blue Sky with "I feel bad for that rat," certainly made me laugh even more. Okay. Yeah, but I'm not firm on Twilight lore either, so I'm not good about that. Yeah, I commented on Jason's. I remember that, although I don't know what I said back in the day. It's been ages. Well, see, Gandalf. Yeah, Gandalf dies, but he comes back, which is one of those things. Yeah, but then again, no spoilers, right? We are not talking about what happens in like the Bible to that guy that they nail to the tree. But then again, even Conan comes back after they crucify him. So seems to me that crucifixion is not the most efficient way of executing people. Hey, Kat, how are you? Maybe that's like the thing though that reading all those Redwall books has done to me is that I have very conflicted emotions about rats now, which is kind of frustrating because rats. I have a lot of like friends who have rats as pets, and they can be really cute and they're super smart. But in Redwall, they're always like the evil ones, but they're also cowardly, and yeah, yeah. Sherlock also died. I remember that. I always wonder if I should read the rest of the like I've read like part of the Sherlock Holmes books, like stories, and then I at some point lost like interest in them. I'm always wondering if it's worth reading the rest of them just so I know which ones to reference when and where, or if I should just like just let them lie because at some point I don't think they're very good, and I really really find Sherlock Holmes the character fucking annoying all the time. And I mean, I guess that's part of how you can read that. But like, I remember that it's in a fairly early one where Sherlock Holmes is taking cocaine and opium alternately to hype himself up and calm himself down. And Watson comes in, it's like, why are you doing that to yourself? And he's like, well, it's the only thing that still brings me some entertainment because talking to people is just so boring. And I'm like, at this point, if I were Watson, I would have fucking punched the man in the face. But we don't ever get that because he's clearly so brilliant. And so at that point, I decided to stop reading Sherlock Holmes stories because it's not worth it to me. Ori, that's like one of the really fascinating things about Redwall is that Redwall Abbey is an abbey and it has an abbot and everything, but it's very much not Christian at all. Christianity doesn't come into it. He just takes the structure of like a monastery, and I think he calls it abbey because he's a British guy, and you call monasteries abbeys in British English. But there's no Christianity whatsoever in these books. No, there's no mouse Jesus. Um, so yeah, it's certainly one of the fascinating things. There's like no religious elements in there at all. Like Redwall Abbey is basically more like an anarchist commune than anything else. So yes, they say grace and they say amen after grace, but grace is usually, hey, we thank you nature for giving us food, and that's it. So no mention of God or gods or anything of the sorts. So I don't know. I think it's really sort of like just taking those medieval trappings because they have to be sort of in like a fantasy or adventure story of that sort. And yeah, that's why the Abbey is in there. Yeah, Doyle was into some really interesting shit in his later life. I remember that. But so was Arthur Machen. At least Arthur Machen was honest about putting all the weirdness into his stories all the time. So there's that. Yeah, no, I was very restrained and polite and everything. I can be that if I don't, feel mad about someone. Well, that's like the other thing, right? Like I've read some essays on different literary fandoms, and obviously you can't go past the Sherlock fandom, which is a Sherlock Holmes fandom, which is a really weird and interesting case study in elitism, gatekeeping, patriarchy, and all of that, and how that is sort of like shaken up by general fandom culture from like the 80s onwards, and obviously even more with the recent like Sherlock shows and everything of the sorts. But yeah, it feels like one of those places I don't necessarily need to go, because I don't think you can casually read Sherlock Holmes, right? I mean, you can obviously can do that and just like forget and go like, well, oh yes, I read that. But if you even Sherlock Holmes is like one of those black holes. You get too close, it just like sucks you in, and suddenly you're doing way too much stupid shit and reading essays on essays on essays on how it's all incredibly fucked up, really, if you think about it. And not before I'm done with Mormonism, is what I'm saying, I guess. I mean, look, I haven't read The Lost World, but I mean, sure, why not, right? It's not about Doyle being necessarily a bad writer. It's more about like the stuff that is in those stories and the stuff he did later on, the stuff he believes, and so forth. And I totally get his, writing Sherlock stories and then being so annoyed with Sherlock that he killed him off, only to have him bring back. I mean, that's like one of the first instances of where writing, where you have like an actual fandom of a sort, even back then, right? Because there were people complaining about Sherlock dying and all of that stuff. Like, that's something you don't necessarily see this organized before then, because you need certain elements of, I don't know, mass media to be there, and the well, not mass media, but like also like the mass availability of that media, and you need literacy to be up to a certain level to have that kind of sort of like culture form around it. So there is interesting stuff to be done with like Sherlock Holmes and around Sherlock Holmes, and it has been done by people for like the last 100 years at least. But yeah. Chantal, it is going to be part of a larger project for this channel, where I will be talking about all of a large quantity of Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere works and so forth, and look at his Mormon influences and so forth. And that's where the research from Mormonism comes in, and it kind of got out of hand for reasons. Those being me being bad at planning stuff, and so that's where that comes from. It's not a personal thing. I'm not ready to convert quite yet. Yeah, the whole like Houdini thing is really funny to me. There's a really cool sort of like TV show or whatever in there about like Houdini and his Ghostbuster friends going around just like trolling all the psychics and and astrologers and so forth at the time, and then it turning into like real ghost hunting. I think there's a good concept there. But then again, I'm pretty sure someone has thought about this before. Yeah, I suppose you will, Britain. I mean, obviously. I think like I've said this before. The main thing with Malazan, or like most books, really, is that we if that it's easy to go in them with like the wrong into them with the wrong conceptions and perceptions or understandings and preconceptions mostly, and Malazan being marketed as super complex and complicated fantasy leads to a lot of these misunderstandings, because it is very different from reading a lot of contemporary fantasy in the way it presents information or doesn't present information in the way that there is. It's like a very open sort of like world where you don't necessarily know anything, or the authors don't necessarily know everything, and that I think makes it very difficult for some people to come to grips with it, because they're trying to read it the wrong way, because they're trying to remember every single detail and ask questions about like what the color of one specific piece of clothing is, because that may be relevant later and stuff. No, it's not. It's not how that works. The same way there is that whole. I love that that anecdote about Glenn Cook, where he was asked about the gender of some of the Taken. You know, there's like these magical, like the bad guys, wizards, and whatever you want to call them in the first Black Company book. They're called the 10 that were taken. And at some point in the first novel, he let slip that there were like 7 dudes and 3 women, I think, or 64. Like, he mentions how many women, how many men were in that, because someone was doing research about something or whatever. And there's a reveal about 2 of them. I mean, we know the gender at the end of the book of some of them. And someone at a convention has, many people have asked Glenn Cook what gender the other Taken are, because you meet the Taken, but you don't necessarily know their gender because, they wear masks and costumes and whatever. And Glenn Cook got super mad about it. It's like, well, I don't know. If I ever need to know, I'll decide back. I'll decide then. And that's sort of like the same thing you see with Steven Erikson and Malazan and some other fantasy books. And that, the people that have grown up on like the Robert Jordan, Brandon Sanderson school of fantasy, which is in that regard, I guess, very close to like the Tolkien approach, right? They believe that for this to be good world building, the author needs to know which gender which wizard is before they start even writing the book, and they need to have a definite answer, and you need to be able to get that answer. And having your author go, no, well, I'll figure it out when I get there, and then I'll make a choice, is very upsetting. And I think that's where a lot of this misunderstanding comes from. And so yeah, that I think makes it sometimes difficult to get into Malazan. And then of course you have sort of like all sort of the reputation, the same way that everyone thinks that the Book of the New Sun is super difficult. It's like, it's not. It's as difficult as you want it to be, because you can do crazy shit with it if you feel like it, but you don't have to. You can just read a story about like an incel leaving his torturer monastery and walking around a place that has giant terror birds and possibly even dinosaurs, and having a cool sword. You can read it that way, and it's a really good book. And you can also read it and think about the Catholic theology embedded into these books. But you don't have to. No one forces you. There is no Tolkien model of epic fantasy in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. I mean, Erikson has written essays on that, and I think what you see in Erikson's book is much more Black Company and Conan and Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser and stuff like that. That's far more the sort of the model that you see in there. Yeah, exactly, Dylan. That's exactly the point. It's like, why do you care? And I totally get that Glenn Cook was pissed about that. It's like, I would be annoyed about that as well. But Brandon Sanderson would have an answer, and people who have grown up with that, and who have grown up with the idea that Brandon Sanderson, even if it's not yet in the books, may just pop in on Reddit and go like, yeah, actually, that's who they are. I think they have like a different like kind of expectation, and the internet and internet fandom has sort of like shifted sort of like these expectations. I think that's a very interesting aspect to both Brandon Sanderson's works and the way we approach media compared to how we approached it, how people approach it, like say in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and so forth, in a lot of ways. And that's like the original idea why I wanted to talk about Brandon Sanderson in particular, because I think he's a very good example to look at that larger sort of shift in fantasy fandom and fantasy consumption, right? And that's like the main thing why I want to talk more about Sanderson in that regard, because he exemplifies that, and it's a larger trend. But you can sometimes picking on one person or picking out one person makes it easier to explain what I think about it. Yeah, Chantal. Although with Lewis, it is very clear that he wanted to bring a very specific Christian message into it. I mean, he said so explicitly. But like, yeah, if you're a child, you don't necessarily have to think about Aslan as Jesus. You don't have to do that. You can enjoy it as, Fluffy Lion getting crucified, which, don't we all fantasize about that? And I think the approach matters, I think, in that regard. And once again, I mean, that's what I've mentioned before, that the whole the literary woods, in the way that Umberto Eco talks about them, which I think is a very good, and like I've said this before, obviously it's a very very plastic sort of image of how reading can work, in that we all can find our own ways through a text, and all of them are valid. Well, most of them are valid. There's obviously ways of getting lost in a text, which are then, about the question, is there a wrong reading of a text? And I think that is, Eco has this wonderful example where he talks about, it's if a friend, or like someone he grew up with, in reading Foucault's Pendulum, and there are parts in Foucault's Pendulum that are sort of semi autobiographical. They are autobiographical writings by one of the characters in Foucault's Pendulum. And they are also semi-autobiographical because they're heavily inspired by Umberto Eco's childhood during World War II in one specific village in the Piedmont where he lived at the time, and so forth, right? And so after the book was published, childhood friend of Eco's messaged, wrote a letter to Eco and complained about, like, why did you put my uncle and my aunt into this book with all those details? And Eco was like, I never knew them. I put like my memories from that time in there. And it's like, this is an invalid reading of the text because these are obviously not based on that. Now, if you go like, they remind me a lot of my own aunt because, growing up as a 10-year-old during World War II in a Piedmont village, with partisans and fascists fighting around the village, will probably make for these kind of things. But the actual event, or like the actual like small details about those two characters, are, made up. They just parallel reality for that reason. But like, so the misstep is in accepting that this is about you, and not that this is just a somewhat universal experience in that regard. And I like that as an example of an actually wrong reading, where we can go and so yeah, this is clearly misreading, because this is not what it is, making it too personal, I think. And I appreciate that, because it allows us to talk about misreading and being, in the same way that AP said that, I guess, about Jason. It's like, sometimes being a bad reader means making those missteps, and it's easy to make them, don't get me wrong, but the goal, I guess, for a reader would be to then go like, in the first moment, I recognize this as like my experience, and then I go back like, well, it can't be my experience. It has to be something more. And accepting that, I think, is an important aspect of understanding that we can go wrong in reading. There are ways of misreading texts. Ooh, The Black Company is really good. The Black Company, I highly recommend reading that, Britain, either before or after Malazan. I think it's a bit more accessible than Malazan because it's just, shorter books. It is, well, Stephen Erickson has called it Vietnam fiction on peyote, which is one way of explaining it, but it certainly has a lot of like Vietnam War fiction elements in it that might be closer to something like The Things They Carried than to Lord of the Rings in some essential ways, and that can make for interesting reading. And it certainly shows you these other sidelines of the fantasy tradition that often get kind of ignored by the people that read basically Lord of the Rings, Memory, Sorrow, Thorn, Wheel of Time, the Cosmere, sort of. All right, everybody. Shall we go for a second sprint where I will try to actually write words on a page, into a text file, and you read books, you read words out of a text file or out of a printed page, and we all come out better people afterwards. How's that sound? I think that's a good idea. So I'll jump back in shortly before 10:30 because 10:30 for me, because then I can run and get my bus to the gym. And if you already go to bed, which you probably should, Britain, then I wish you a good night, and we'll probably talk about something on some Discord or whatever, or talk about whatever tomorrow, I guess. So until then, happy reading, get shit done, and good night if you go to sleep because you live over in the Americas, as some people used to call them. Hello again. I did, in fact, manage some writing. Not much, though. I did, though, I think I've made a wise choice. One of the things that I'm always struggling with is, now I've said this before, right? Is making decisions. It's not exactly my strong suit in any way or form. And with writing, like every time you especially I guess with the beginning of something like a larger story, right? The main thing is like every choice you make has these consequences. And so what's this character's trade, right? What is what is I mean, obviously historical, so he is different words. You can't say job. It's like what is his trade? What is he trying to learn? Is he going to be an apprentice for whatever, right? So the question is usually where do these things go? And if you introduce someone, go like, well, he's clearly has like artistic talent. He likes to imagine things, to have visual images, and to maybe draw them if he finds the tools for that. That has consequences because that kind of puts them that will influence what they can do later, what they will do later, and how their mind works and stuff like that. And these are choices that are very final. um, because like as long as I don't actually write that down, there's still the potential for the character to be something different, to be someone different, to have different talent or whatever. So making these choices is always um, has consequences, and I hate consequences, I guess. But I made some. And choices are important, I guess. So I made some choices, and I think they might be the right ones because now I have two characters that do have ideas of where they want to go in life, and we'll see if that leads to the sort of places where I would need them to be for this to work the way I right now imagine it to work. We'll find out very soon, I guess. Messaging Kulmbacher. It's been ages since I drank Kulmbacher beer, to be fair. So, but yeah, good luck with that. Also, yeah, good luck with the debt thing. Certainly something I'm familiar with, so I should probably do that one of these days as well. Ooh, nice. Well, in that case, that's what I call service. So good thing to know. I think like I drank Kulmbacher when I was at a festival in, oh god, where wasn't that? Where was that? Somewhere around that area, I think. But it was ages ago. But it was like the local stuff that we could get at like the next supermarket, so we took that. And it was a drinkable beer. Not saying anything bad about it. Alcohol-free wheat beer is what was bad, and the brewery is replacing it, which pretty neat. Because around here we take our beer seriously, and if you have bad beer, the brewery will do something about that usually. All right. Looking at the time, I will have to rush because the rambling parts got kind of out of hand today, and I will have to rush if I want to catch the bus. So yeah, thanks for hanging out. I hope you got some stuff done. Obviously, some of you did. Good luck with your day. Good night if you're going to sleep because you live on, the opposite side of the planet. And yeah, see you tomorrow if you have nothing better to do. And otherwise, see you somewhere around and have a good day.